Hello, and welcome to the third in our series of 3 launch webinars of the report, Breaking the Plastic Wave. a comprehensive assessment of pathways towards stopping ocean plastic pollution. On behalf of our partner, SYSTEMIQ, and the Pew Charitable Trusts, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today. My name is Winnie Lau, and I'm the Senior Manager for the Preventing Ocean Plastics Project at the Pew Charitable Trusts. For those of you who are not familiar with Pew, Pew is a nonprofit organization with a 70-year history that uses evidence-based, nonpartisan analysis to solve some of today's most pressing challenges. We have approximately 20 projects focused on the environment and a long history of ocean conservation work that aims to deliver public policy change or other tangible results. We are launching the Breaking the Plastic Wave report with the support from our 4 thought partners: the University of Oxford, the University of Leeds, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and Common Seas. We hope that the report and the webinar today will be informative and instructive, as well as a catalyst for change. For our lineup today, I will begin by introducing you to Breaking the Plastic Wave and the reason it has come into being. Next, you'll hear from Yoni Shiran, Program Director at SYSTEMIQ and my co-lead in this work. Yoni will be taking us through the report. I will offer a few reflections after Yoni's presentation. And then we will have about half an hour for questions and answer with Yoni and myself. We would love for you to ask questions. It's a key part of what we want to do today. You can post your questions by writing them in the chat box at the side of your screens. You can also tweet your questions to us using the hashtag #BreakingThePlasticWave. So let me begin by sharing how this work came into being. In 2017, when Pew started looking at how we could solve the ocean plastic pollution problem, we recognized that there was some amazing work being done by so many organizations globally. At the same time, we also identified a gap. There was a need for solution and data-driven analysis of the potential impact of different solutions to better inform policymakers and businesses. So drawing upon Pew's strength in evidence-based analysis, we set out on a multi-year project to provide this vital information. We partnered with SYSTEMIQ, and together we charted the 2-year journey, culminating in the just-released report Breaking the Plastic Wave and the complementary scientific article in the renowned journal Science, which reinforces the scientific rigor of the methodology behind the report. The research was funded independently by Pew, included 17 experts across the entire plastic value chain with broad geographical experience. And as I mentioned earlier, conducted in close collaboration with our 4 knowledgeable thought partners: the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, the University of Oxford, the University of Leeds, and Common Seas. In addition, our project team consulted over 80 experts from around the globe and drew upon a wide range of existing analyses, reports, publications to develop the model and analysis. It's also important to acknowledge that Breaking the Plastic Wave follows in the footsteps of 2 seminal reports from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which established the vision of circularity for the global plastics industry, highlighted the need for reuse, redesign, and recycling, and garnered unprecedented support across the global plastics value chain. Building on the important work by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and many others, SYSTEMIQ and Pew offer a global analysis that evaluates different strategies to reduce plastic pollution going into the ocean and quantifies the associated economic, environmental, and social implications of each pathway. The ultimate aim of this work is to help guide policymakers, industry executives, investors, and civil society leaders through a complex and often data-poor landscape of potential solutions. Our analysis points to areas where changes are needed to the global system in order to stop plastic pollution from going into the ocean. Now, I'll turn it over to Yoni, who'll share our key findings. Yoni?
Good afternoon. It's absolutely wonderful to be here with you today. This project has been my baby for the last 2 years, and I'm thrilled to be sharing it with you all today. For me, this journey started the first time I went to Indonesia. I remember going to the beach and seeing it covered in plastic as far as the eye can see, to the point you couldn't even see the sand underneath. I remember seeing the children playing on piles of rubbish, 80 centimeters high, probably not even aware that there is sand underneath. Many of you have been there and know exactly what I'm talking about. The awful sights, the smell of decay, the tough conversations in people's houses of the local village people. It was an out of this world experience. These are communities that are threatened. These are ecosystems that are threatened. And these are livelihoods that are threatened. At that point, you realize how far we have departed from nature's most basic design principles. When I first realized through this project that we have the solutions to address this problem, I was absolutely excited. And it's not something that would take 50 years or 100 years. It's something that we can do in our lifetimes. By the time that my baby daughter is 20, plastic pollution could be a thing of the past. That for me was a eureka moment, and I'm very excited to share with you the details of how to achieve it. When we started this project, it was evident that this topic of plastics has garnered unprecedented attention from governments, from industry, from civil society, and from the public. At the same time, it was evident that there were 5 unreconciled propositions. Some were saying we should ban plastics altogether. Some were saying we should burn or bury plastic. Some were saying we should clean up after the fact. Some were saying we can just recycle plastic and that we could build a recycling industry as big as the plastic production industry itself. And some were saying that we can address it with biosolutions and make a material that can biodegrade. But when you start asking, how do strategies perform on environmental, economic, and social indicators? What are the costs and investments that are required? How applicable are they to different geographies and different materials? How quickly can they be implemented and scaled? Solutions weren't there. Answers weren't there. In short, we didn't have a global roadmap of solutions, how to address this challenge. The world didn't have a plan or a strategy of how to deal with the issue. And all the while, the plastic tide kept rising. Breaking the plastic wave is exceptional in 4 ways. First, our laser focus on solutions to try to quantify and understand how much they cost, what are their greenhouse gas implications, what are their employment implications, what are their enablers, and how they interact with different solutions. Second, the scientific rigor, which is at the core of Pew's and SYSTEMIQ's DNA. As many of you will have seen, we published a paper in Science last week exactly for this reason, to gain the credibility, the scientific credibility that this project needs. Third, we build a system-wide model that looks at upstream solutions and downstream solutions and tries to understand the interconnectedness and interrelatedness between different solutions and how they impact each other. And fourth, it was data driven. Everything we did in this project was data driven because our intent was to help decision makers make better decisions through better data. I want to take a moment from the stage to thank the amazing expert panel we have been working with so closely over the last 2 years. This is a fantastic group of experts who represent different geographies and different parts of the value chain. We absolutely could not have done it without you. Thank you. So I will go through the main findings of the work by answering 5 critical but very simple questions. Where are we headed? What's the way out? What will it cost? Where do we start? And what's the prize? Where are we headed? Business as usual indicators are gruesome. If you look at municipal solid plastic waste, it is expected to double over the next 20 years. At the same time, plastic pollution to the ocean and to ecosystems more broadly will triple, and plastic stock in the ocean will quadruple. 2x, 3x, 4x. This is a future that none of us want. The world was shocked a few years ago when researchers found that 8 million tons of plastic may be leaking to the ocean per year. Just imagine what it would look like if 29 million tons of plastic leaked to the ocean. That is equivalent of 50 kilograms of plastic for every meter of shoreline in the world. Evidently, there are actions being taken by many governments and many industries who understand the challenge. We have tried to quantify what all of those commitments add up to together, and we estimate that those current commitments add up to 7% reduction of business as usual leakage. So while they are a great first step, we need far more ambitious action by government and industry, and we need many more players to be involved. The risk is not just for ecosystems. If you look at industry, for example, we estimate that the cost of the full plastic waste management in 2040 will be about $100 billion. That is 3 times more the gross profit of plastic production today. If in the future, industry is asked by government to pay for this externality, industry may find that their current business models do not add up. This is a real industry risk. So, what's the way out? We have seen that business as usual is not the way out, and we have seen that the current commitments are a good first step, but they're not going to solve the issue either. Next, we defined what we call the recycling scenario. Here, we tried to quantify as ambitiously as we possibly could, what would it look like if we developed an ambitious recycling infrastructure together with an ambitious collection infrastructure, ambitious design for recycling, and even scaling chemical recycling. And what we found is that while this scenario would have a dent on pollution, it will not get us anywhere near zero leakage. We simply cannot recycle our way out of this problem. This has been said by many before us, but finally we were able to quantify that statement. Next, we looked at reduce and substitute and ask ourselves, what would it look like if we pushed these solutions as ambitiously as we can possibly imagine? All the reuse solutions and the refill solutions and the new materials and all the wonderful innovations that are out there, all the way to their technical limits, their economic limits, their consumer acceptance limits, and their climate limits. And what we found is that this scenario could flatten the curve, but it could not get us down to near zero. Next, we looked at a collect and dispose scenario. So if you scale up collection and landfill as ambitiously as you can possibly imagine, and pour billions and billions of dollars into collection systems all over the world, the result was, again, you flatten the curve, you don't get to near zero. It was only when you combine upstream and downstream solutions together to what we call the system change scenario that you're able to reduce leakage by over 80%. But that requires implementing all known solutions ambitiously, concurrently, and starting immediately. So let's take a look at what that means for the system. If you follow the bottom line, the leakage line, here's what the rest of the system looks like. The amount at the bottom is the leakage to the ocean, which is of course a derivative of the total mismanaged waste. This number is significantly reducing under the system change scenario. And here's what the rest of the system looks like. A significant chunk of the system would need to be reduced, or amount of the plastic would need to be reduced. We estimate this to be 30%. Many people before us have said that we must get rid of unnecessary or avoidable plastic. We have, I think for the first time, quantified the potential of that. Next, we look at the substitute wedge, which we think is 17%. So if we account for all the plastic alternatives and take into account their unintended consequences, we think that we could replace plastic, 17% of plastic, in a way that makes sense. Next, we look at the recycling wedge, which we think can scale to up to 84 million tons of actually recycled plastic. That's a massive scale up relative to today. And last, we have the dispose wedge for all the plastic that cannot be reduced, cannot be substituted, and cannot be recycled. We need to build controlled facilities to dispose of this plastic safely. So if you put all these puzzle pieces together, what you get is this wedges chart. This is the signature chart or analysis from our report, and it shows what a path to ocean leakage reduction could look like. And a way to think about it is the purple wedge is utility that we would be fulfilling to consumers in non-material ways. The blue wedge substitute is utility that we would be fulfilling in non-plastic ways. The green recycle wedge is utility that we would be fulfilling in non-virgin plastic ways. And the yellow and red wedges is plastic that we would be fulfilling, or a utility that we would be fulfilling with virgin plastic. So if you like this cake, you must be asking yourself, what are the ingredients that are needed? What are the actions or interventions that are needed to bake this cake? And so we have written out what we think are the system interventions that would be required to achieve this future. And they include reducing 1/3 of plastic production, substituting 1/6 of plastic with paper and compostables, ambitiously designing products and packaging for recycling to ensure that at least 54% is technically and economically recyclable, expanding waste collection in middle and low income countries to 90% in urban areas and 50% in rural areas, increasing mechanical recycling by 2.5-fold, and developing a plastic to plastic chemical conversion industry. But all of that is not enough. We also need to build facilities for controlled disposal for the 23% of plastic that cannot be reduced, substituted, or recycled. And we need to reduce plastic waste exports by 90%. We also need to deal with microplastic pollution. We have analyzed this in great detail. Due to time, we're not going to cover that today. But if you would like to look at that analysis and what changes need to happen, you're more than welcome to look at the report. Even if we take all those actions, there will still be 10% of plastic pollution, which is mismanaged, which is leaking to environments. And to deal with that, we need significant innovation. A couple of innovation areas that our model suggests should be prioritized include barrier performance for monomaterials, product redesign to packaging-free alternatives, bio-benign materials, distributed collection, especially for rural areas of low-income countries where collection economics simply do not add up, and advanced sorting and recycling technologies. What will it cost? There are different ways to measure costs. One could look at company costs, so what are the revenues and the cost of a specific business, be it in recycling or different parts of the value chain. You could look at the full system costs to understand what does it cost to deliver the entire value chain. And you could look at planetary costs, which also includes externalities, the cost of externalities. We have focused our work on the second one, on the system costs, and really tried to quantify the cost for the entire economy, the real cost to the entire economy, from production and conversion to collection sorting, recycling, and waste management. And we've distinguished between government cost, private sector cost, and really try to understand all the different parts of the cost of the value chain. And if you look back at the wedges chart for a second, and you take a thin sliver out of 2040, and you turn it by 90 degrees, we could map out what the cost of the different wedges would look like. And what we found is that the reduced wedge is potentially the most cost-effective one, where you eliminate plastic and use reusable systems that could have a net saving to the system as a whole. Next, recycling is often in the money. It may not be that way in every place of the world today, but we think that with the right policies and with the right R&D and with the right changes, recycling could be in the money and could be a self-sustaining system on its own. Next, dispose is a net cost solution, and it will always be that way. And substitute, which is more expensive than plastic, oftentimes. If we put all this together, so the cost to governments could be reduced by 11%, and cost to the private sector could be reduced by 13% in the system change scenario. If we look at the environment, leakage to the ocean can be reduced by 82%, and greenhouse gas emissions can be reduced by 25%. And it's also better for communities with a net job creation of over 700,000 jobs. A lot of people are talking in the age of COVID about the need to build back better. This to me is build back better. Better for the economy, better for the environment, more employment, more jobs. So where do we start? Some plastic materials have a disproportionate pollution. Specifically, if you look at flexible monomaterials and multi-layer materials, these make up 59% of production, but they have a disproportionate pollution with 80% of pollution. So focus and solutions should absolutely target these types. What's the prize? I showed you how the system change scenario can reduce government spending. It can reduce private sector spending. It can reduce greenhouse gas emissions and plastic pollution, and it can increase jobs. But I want to take you back to the beach of Munchar for a second. We ran a project where we cleaned up just a few hundred meters of beach, and the children came running back to play in the sand, many for the first time, and just be children. As a father, it made me realize how plastic pollution is not just taking away the tourism and taking away the employment of their parents. Plastic pollution is also taking away their childhood. And if nothing else, hopefully that alone is a good enough reason for all of us to act. Thank you very much. Winnie, back to you.
Thank you, Yoni, for that detailed and thought-provoking presentation of our work. So first, I'd like to remind our participants that you can enter your questions by writing them in the chat box at the side of your screens. You can also tweet your questions to us using the hashtag #BreakingThePlasticWave. Second, I really want to thank Yoni for sharing that very touching story about the children in Muncha in Indonesia and about the future for your daughter. It helps remind us all why we need to solve this problem. My first reaction to all of our work is that our analysis, our findings give us hope, as you have noted, Yoni. Many of the solutions are already at hand. If we choose to, globally as a society, we can do great things together. We would be able to solve the plastic pollution problem in one generation. We're at a crossroads, and the question is, what choice do we make? The report, which contains many more details than Yoni can share in his presentation, show us the how in achieving the impact possible in the system change scenario. It breaks down the plastic system by plastic categories, by geographic characteristics, by different parts of this plastic system, and as Yoni noted and highlighted, also includes microplastics that enter the environment. The data and analysis allow us to dig deep into the system and consider the different real-world pathways that could curb plastic pollution. And I want to highlight just two of the key geographic findings. The first is the role of the informal sector in the middle and low-income countries. This informal sector is currently responsible for collecting about 60% of the plastic that is being recycled globally today. As we move forward, it will be important to ensure fair payment, safe working conditions, and secure livelihoods for both formal and informal waste pickers. The second is the growing contribution of microplastics to ocean plastic pollution. The biggest source of microplastic we found will be from tire dust, and the amount and the proportion of microplastics from tire dust in terms of overall plastic pollution, especially in high-income countries, will need to be addressed. I also want to highlight the sobering fact that we do need to start acting now. Because if we do not, a delay of just 5 years in our action would mean 80 million metric tons more plastic in the ocean by the year 2040. There are some places now in the world where we could literally be swimming through plastic waste. We have the opportunity to stop this from happening everywhere in the ocean. And I'll admit the road ahead will be challenging, but there is a path forward, and it is one where all stakeholders work together. Governments with businesses, with innovators, with civil society. There is a role for all of us. By working together and starting now, we can be on the path to near zero plastic going into the ocean. So now we'll go into the Q&A portion of the webinar. We would love to hear from you. Please do send us your questions, both with the chat box or with our hashtag Breaking the Plastic Wave. So let me turn to our first question, and it is from Becky Walker. And the question is, your work highlights the key role that the informal sector waste pickers play in these communities, and they're often undervalued, underpaid, and risking their health. What can governments and businesses do to better support the informal sector? So I'll tackle the government side, and then I'll hand it over to Yoni to tackle the business involvement side. So for governments, in order to expand the informal sector, you need to expand the informal sector to become a socially just solution to plastic pollution. So the waste pickers need to be paid fairly, and their working conditions need to be improved, their safety, their health. And in many areas around the world, waste pickers have been shown to really reduce the amount of municipal waste that are spreading, and the amount of spending that local governments, need to be spending on waste management. So if even a portion of these savings could be passed on to the waste pickers, that could have a real impact on their livelihoods and on their potential to contribute even greater to the plastic pollution, solving the plastic pollution problem. So I'll turn it over to Yoni. What do you think businesses can do?
So I think the first step in solving any problem is to recognize it. And it is important that we all recognize the critical role of the informal sector and that we recognize how they are part of the solution and not part of the problem. I think businesses can do a lot, and many progressive companies are doing already to lean in and to support the informal sector. This can be by partnering with organizations that support them, by committing to buying materials that they collect, and by committing to making sure that they have the health requirements and the human right requirements that they need. Especially in the time of COVID, many waste pickers are struggling. They are on the front line. Many times their employment are under risk. Many times their health are under risk. businesses and governments have a critical role in leaning out to these communities at risk and supporting them in ways that are not very expensive. And if we increase the value of plastics, that will almost automatically, part of that value will trickle down to the communities who are collecting and selling that plastic.
Thanks, Joni. I couldn't agree more. And I feel that our work has really highlighted the importance of waste pickers, and hopefully that will lead to improved conditions for them and also, for all of us. So the second question we have is from Vincent DeCap. Um, he thanked us for our exceptional work. Thank you, Vincent. So the question is, did you study in your work system global level ways to finance the costs we just presented, at least initially? So I'll turn this over to you, Yoni.
So if I understand the question, it is how do we finance some of the costs? If that's what you're asking, what's interesting is the system change scenario actually requires less investment than the business as usual scenario. In fact, we think that over the next 20 years, the system change scenario will require $1.2 trillion in capital investments relative to $2.5 trillion under BAU. And most of that is driven by the fact that under BAU, we're building a lot of plastic production and plastic conversion facilities, which are highly capital intensive. And under the system change scenario, a big portion of that goes away. Now, I have to admit, it's not all rosy. The solutions that are required in the system change scenario often are less mature than the ones in the business as usual, and they often have higher risk profile. So it is definitely a critical question of how do we get the funding into these technologies, into these assets where the risk to return profile is sometimes tricky. And I think that here governments can absolutely help by leveling the playing field and taking a number of actions to de-risk these investments. And more details of that can be read in our report.
Great, thanks, Yoni. Yeah, the economics hopefully will help make the case for the system change scenario. Our next question is from Alex. How do we mobilize with governments and businesses? How do we ensure economic recovery efforts from the COVID pandemic don't distract or forget the plastic crisis? So again, we'll split it up. I'll tackle the government side, and Yoni, I'll turn it over to you for the business side. So, one of the reasons we did this work was to, one, provide the evidence around the problem and the solutions to solve it. And we hope that this work will actually be a critical turning point to catalyze the changes that are needed. And to mobilize governments and businesses, we truly feel that the first thing is that we have to have a common base of understanding, which we hope our work will provide. And then next, we'll need some leaders in all sectors to be able to say, I will set the example and I will bring my colleagues with me. And then the last piece is we're going to need some conveners to bring all the different groups together, bring all the different leaders together so that we can work together to solve this problem. One of the things that we found from our work is this is a true system problem and then whole of society problem where everyone actually does have to play their part in order for us to achieve the impact, the reduction in plastic pollution that is possible. And in terms of the pandemic, we've gotten that question quite a bit, but the world will come together and solve the pandemic problem. But the environmental pollution problems, all the environmental problems that we have now, they will still be there after the pandemic. They're not going to go away on their own. And governments and businesses and all of us will be confronted with them again. And, we are at a time in history where society may change as a result of the pandemic. Um, you know, Business models might be changing, or how our economy works might be changing. And what we outlined in our report can show how we could rebuild to a different system, to a more circular system, to a system that's better for health and the environment and the economy all at the same time. And so I think that there is a lot of opportunity ahead to take this moment, this crisis, and turn it into many, many opportunities for a much better future. And governments have a role by putting in place the right incentives and the right policies to enable that. So, Yoni, what about businesses?
Thanks, Winnie. I think the question was, how can we mobilize governments and businesses on this issue? And I would actually argue that they are mobilized already. There isn't probably a government anywhere from Indonesia to Norway, Canada, Vietnam, Malaysia, China. All of these governments are actively thinking about this topic. And if I focus on businesses, it's exactly the same. It's hard to think of a single company who touches or works with plastic who is not thinking about this topic. Many of our people in the audience are from these companies, and you will know better than me that this is a board level discussion. This is many of the senior executives that we work with describe this as a top 3 risk, and I'm talking about large food companies. So I think the businesses are mobilized already. If I could slightly reframe the question, I would say, how can we increase their ambition further? And for that, I would say it requires, first of all, data and understanding of what the different solutions and the different options are. And hopefully our work does something to help in that direction. And it's also a matter of aligning incentives, as Winnie was talking about. And I think governments actually have a big role in aligning some of the incentives to help those businesses who want to be part of the solution, as the vast majority of them do, to actually act on the change.
Great. Thanks, Yoni. Our next question is from Andrew Henderson. Um, the oil barrel price went negative in March, causing the dramatic drop. Um, if it has been if it has been there once, then it could go there again in terms of the oil price dropping. So recycling cannot compete with virgin plastic. So what can we do? What can we do to manage the oil price fluctuating problem?
That's a great question. And low oil prices obviously pose a tremendous risk on the recycling industry, given how low virgin plastics prices are. I think there's a number of things that could be done. First and foremost, companies can commit to purchasing recycled content and giving the recycling industry the certainty that it needs for long-term planning, knowing that there is going to be demand for the product to invest into those facilities. The industry can also collaborate and partner to try to create aggregate demand, not try to solve it every company on its own, but actually companies coming together to increase the demand for recycled content. Equally, governments can set minimum recycled content targets. We've seen many of those being set in the UK, in other parts of Europe, in other parts of the world. Governments are talking about tax benefits to companies that have a minimum recycled content. That is a good mechanism to ensure demand and support the recycling industry, even with low oil prices. I think in general, we need to find ways to level the playing field. The reality is that oil has a massive advantage, has very large subsidies almost everywhere in the world through the oil and gas industry flowing to plastics. That just makes it very, very difficult for innovations and new materials to compete. So I think there's a number of things that could be done to try to level the playing field and try to support new materials and recycling and recycled content, which was the focus of the question.
Yeah, thanks, Yoni. And I'll add to that too, another thing that needs to happen in addition to what Yoni just outlined is that we also need to look at the front end of the problem, which is designing products for recycling. And by doing that, you will also decrease the cost of recycling and make recycled content material more competitive. But all of the other things you outlined, Yoni, I think they're very much needed. The next question is from Alina Marm. Um, Thank you for thanking us for this great work. Of the eliminate lever, how much of it is packaging and how much of it is other plastic items?
Yeah, thanks, Alina, for the question. We have broken down the wedges chart that I showed you before to different plastic types and to different geographic types. We have a lot more granularity than what we had time to show today. So if you're interested in more details, you can find a lot of that in the report, and I'm also happy to discuss it offline. The short answer to your question, Alina, is a lot of it is packaging. The reduce wedge was divided into 3 sub wedges: eliminate, which is just examples is over packaging or just unnecessary plastic, or even shifting to concentrates or new innovations like that. The second was around consumer reuse models. These are example of that is the reusable water bottle that we all carry to our gyms, at least when gyms were open. Another way of reducing plastic is consumer reuse models. And the third is what we call new delivery models. Here's models where it involves companies making changes to their supply chain and providing either refill systems or reuse systems that involve the companies. Most of that innovation today is focused on single-use plastic, and most of that is packaging, for the simple reason that that is the type of plastic that is leaking the most and is garnering most of the attention. But not to say that for other plastic types, there are many models out there, circular economy models and other models that look to reduce the waste by design, and that involves not just the packaging but also the product itself, by ensuring it has a second life, by ensuring its durability, and by many other circular economy principles.
Yeah, thank you, Yoni. Yeah, I do urge all of you, if you want to dig into the details, our report has many of the details. I do want to follow on Yoni and highlight that, Alina, you picked up on a really important point, which is plastic packaging is by far the biggest contributor to plastic pollution in the environment, and particularly the flexible types, the multi-material sachet types. If we don't really focus on them, their share of the plastic pollution problem will actually grow. So it is something we need to focus on. The next question, I can't quite get the name, but it's about what role does technology need to play in tackling the plastic crisis? So, for example, are there gaps in recycling technologies or analytics of plastic waste streams for extended producer responsibility? And I'll start and then invite Yoni to add to it. So, in terms of the technologies for solving this problem, as Yoni said, we need the front end, which is more sustainable and biodegradable materials. There's also a lot of innovation and pilots out there looking at refill and reuse systems. So not just our water bottles, but actually the household products, the food items. Can we go to a system where we are refilling and reusing the containers rather than buying a whole new one each and every time we need the product? So that there's innovation and technology happening there, and hopefully that will accelerate. On the recycling end, We need recycling technologies that can better sort materials. As Yoni presented, there's different economics associated with different types of plastics. And also, because there are so many different polymers out there today and all the different products, um, to get the most out of recycled materials, we actually don't want to mix the polymers. You need to keep them separate, and that's when you can have the highest values, and they could be kept in the system for as long as possible. So, we need better sorting technology, but we also need better guidelines and labeling for what different products are, and how do we design products that are um, easier for recycling, easier for sorting. So we need better sorting. And then lastly, if we can have um, better, I wouldn't say it's necessarily a technology issue, but more of an approach issue, which is how do we ensure we collect the materials, collect the waste. And that is a place for innovation, not just in technology, but also in governance systems, as well as how communities work together. So, Yoni, what can we add to that?
Yeah, thanks, Winnie. I would say technology is a massive enabler of the system change scenario, full stop. There probably isn't a single part of the value chain that you look at that doesn't require more technology and more innovation. In our analysis, we split, we looked at the system change scenario, which is the one that reduces 80% of the leakage. And to achieve that scenario, you need technologies everywhere, be it for traceability of materials and things like blockchain or other technologies, be it through better sorting technologies and automated sorting, as Winnie talked about, with technologies like machine learning and others. There's technologies that are needed everywhere in the recycling industry. How do we recycle to achieve food grade recyclates? If you think about the informal sector, how can we, through technology, enable them and create marketplaces and enable mechanisms, some similar to what Uber has done in the transportation space? How can we bring that to the waste space and use some technologies to make the life of the informal sector better and more productive? So technology is really needed everywhere for the system change scenario. But we even go further and we say 20% of the problem cannot even be solved with things that we have names for. So there's a big need for things that we don't have a name for, and that will require technology. So in short, we need it everywhere.
Thanks, Yoni. Yeah, technology and innovation are really key. Um, but I want to highlight and underscore for everyone, having technology makes it all easier, but we do know how to do this. We do have the solutions. We do have the technology that are in existence today to help solve this problem. But technology can really help accelerate, make things easier, maybe make things cheaper. The next question is from Rebecca Smith. Recycling makes up a large portion of our plastic reduction cake. Thank you, Yoni, for coining that new term. Given that the plastic degrades with recycling, how has this and the end of life of plastics that have been recycled been accounted for in our analysis?
I can take that. That's a great question. Thanks, Rebecca. Yes, you're right. Mechanical recycling does degrade the plastic every loop without getting too technical into the chemistry. It does shorten the polymer chains every time. And so depending what plastic we're talking about, you can only recycle it 3 or 4 times. And we have accounted for that in the modeling. The sad reality is that we don't actually reach that limit most of the times, because we don't, we only have recycling rates of 10, 15%, maybe a bit higher depending on the geography, but we don't get to the problem where we're recycling it 3 times because most plastic isn't even recycled once. So that's kind of a problem for the future. Even in the system change scenario and the very ambitious scenario that we outlined, we see very little plastic reaching the limit of its quality in terms of recycling. It reaches other limits much before that. And of course, there are chemical conversion technologies that are still in early stages and still need to be proven, but they could, at least in theory, recycle plastic multiple times. Of course, this comes with the important caveat that we need to understand even better what are the greenhouse gas implications and risks, and what are the health risks of these technologies. But at least in principle, there could be technologies that can recycle plastic multiple times.
Mm-hmm. Thank you,
And just to,
Yoni.
sorry,
Mm-hmm.
Winnie, just one more point. The
Yeah.
recycling process has a lot of losses everywhere in the chain. It has it today, and we think that even in the future, even with improvements, it will always have losses. And that is why we said before that we cannot recycle our way out of the problem. So yes, recycling is critically needed, and we need to scale recycling, especially mechanical recycling, as much as we can. But let's not rely on it, and let's make sure that we tackle the other wedges as well.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I can't underscore enough that probably our best friend right now in terms of economics and you know, quickness in implementation would be trying to reduce as much as possible to begin with. Um, the next question, another one from Alina. Thanks, Alina. You refer to all solutions as technically available. How do you assess this? For example, theoretical availability or actual application today?
Great question. We have run a very rigorous process to um, quantify different solutions and to come up with the size of the pie that they could apply. In simple terms, there were 4 tests that we checked different solutions against. There was the technology test. Is the technology available for the solution? There was the performance test. Is the result of the solution hitting the performance that we need in terms of barrier properties, in terms of other mechanical properties, and all the wonderful properties that plastic has? There was the affordability test. What is the cost of the solution? And there was the customer acceptance test. And it was only solutions that passed successfully those 4 tests that were included in the analysis. So that was a bit of the method that we used. We also looked at, for different technologies, we ask ourselves, what is their limiting factor? So if I give you one example, chemical conversion, there's a big question in the world, how much can this technology grow? Should it even grow? And for things like that, we ask ourselves, the limiting factor for that is oftentimes funding. So we ask, how quickly can this thing be funded? But it's also feedstock availability. So we really try to ask, these different technologies, what are their limiting factors, what are their bottlenecks, and we try to assess each of those independently to try to understand the potential of different solutions in different markets under different scenarios.
Great. And I think what we really try to look at, just to add to Yoni, is the technologies are assessed at the level where they're ready, and they're ready for implementation and scale up. I mean, some of them are mature and some of them are, at the early stages of being scaled up. We did not include technologies that are still in the lab, recognizing that the time frame we looked at was 20 years. And so oftentimes what is being in development in labs will take much longer before it could be scaled commercially to have an impact globally. But those types of solutions are the types that we're looking at to solve that last mile, that last 5 million metric tons that we estimate might still be going into the ocean in 2040. So the next question from Bram Brockman. Thank you for your comment that we have presented the work clearly. So your question is, what is our opinion on a high-level revenue-neutral plastic tax that can be set at a certain dollar per ton level to slowly disincentivize virgin production? And I'll take first stab at it and then turn it over to Yoni. The question really, I think, comes down to how do we level the playing field between the price one gets for the recycled material, so the recyclates, And how do you level that playing field between recyclates and virgin plastic feedstock? And part of it is, are there credits and subsidies, and are they applied across the board between the two different types of feedstock? And currently, um, recyclates they don't have those government support. And one way that could help with in leveling the playing field is, could governments help provide the type of support like for renewable energy and alternative fuel cars, for example. I'll turn it over to Yoni to add some more to that.
Yeah, the question of taxing virgin plastic is the $1 million question, maybe the $1 billion question, a highly controversial topic and highly complex topic. My perspective on that is to say there's probably two types of taxes you can think of. You can think of voluntary taxes, and you can think of regulated or mandated taxes. I think there are organizations out there that have tried to advocate for voluntary taxes on virgin plastic. And I think, and maybe some efforts are still in their way, but I think that some of these advocates have realized that this is a difficult proposition because it is hard to get the entire industry on board on something voluntary. But I think, on the other hand, that if there were mandated or regulated taxes where all companies have to pay, and I think that could be a way to level the playing field, as Winnie was suggesting, and I think that could be a way to support the non-plastic alternatives and to recognize and prize those companies that are progressive and that are really making significant efforts to reduce their virgin plastic footprint and their plastic footprint overall.
Thanks, Yoni. I couldn't agree more. Actually, I want to add one more thought to that. That is, we could set recycling content targets, and that is divorced from whether, what the price of virgin versus recyclates is. At the end of the day, there's a demand and supply. And if the demand for recyclates is there, either from government set targets or company set targets, that will automatically grow the market for recyclates, regardless of the price of virgin plastic. So, because sometimes taxes and credits can be difficult and controversial, but setting recycling content targets, could be something that could be achieved quicker and more broadly, possibly. So the next question is from Tamay Kapur. Sorry if I butchered your name. Thank you for your comment about the work contribution. Your question is, can you please elaborate on the connection between population growth and the use of plastics in the report? What are the assumptions and the estimations?
Yes, I can happily take that. Almost the first step of the work was to project how much will plastic grow under business as usual. And we saw that there are several trends contributing to the explosion of growth in plastic. One of them being population growth, specifically in the global south. The data that we took was from the UN, where they take into account not just population growth, but also urbanization rates and coastalization rates, which both contribute to more plastic and more plastic near the ocean. We also looked at trends like growing consumption per capita and shifting from recyclable plastic to hard to recycle plastic, which is a trend that unfortunately we are seeing in many parts of the world. But to your question, population growth has absolutely been is definitely a big driver of the growth in plastic. In fact, we are seeing 1.7 billion people are expected to be added to the global population by 2040, based on UN data. And that obviously is a big driver to much of the increased consumption of plastic.
Thanks, Yoni. It is a challenge, but I think our report shows that there is a way to balance that out.
And if I,
Mhm.
sorry, Winnie, if I can just
Go
add
ahead. Yeah.
one more thought on that point. Currently, there are 2 billion people in the world without collection services. That's 2 billion with a B. If we add 1.7 billion more people to this planet, that will be almost 4 billion people that need to be connected to collection services by the year 2040. If you do a simple exercise and you divide that 4 billion population by the number of days left from now to 2040, you easily find that we need to connect over 500,000 people every single day from January 1st to December 31st for 20 years in a row, including Saturday, Christmas, everything. That just shows the scale of the challenge. So if I can just leave you with that number, 500,000 people per day that need to be connected. That is the scale of the challenge, and that is why we're talking about we must reduce the amount of plastic in the system, because we will never possibly connect all these people fast enough.
Thank you, Yoni. And I think it's a really great point to end on. Our R is up. And I really, really thank all of our participants for the really good questions. They really get at the heart of the problem. And thank you again for submitting them. And I apologize to some of you who submitted questions and we were not able to get to them. Please feel free to reach out to us, and happy to have deeper discussions with all of you. And with that, I will offer a few parting thoughts before we end. So based on the questions from all of you and from the research we did, it's clear that there is a lot of deep thinking and many efforts are underway. And they underscore that in order to solve the plastic pollution problem, we need all of the stakeholders to be engaged, to be acting. And we'll need the international institutions, governments, businesses, and civil society to participate, but really, most importantly, to lead in these innovations. And the story that Yoni shared about the children in Munchar, and even closer to home about his daughter, is shows us what is at stake. That solving this problem is vital for our children's future and their present, and for all of our future. So, if I may, I would love for all of us to leave from today with this key takeaway, which is that plastic pollution is an urgent problem, and we all need to work together to put in place the ambitious actions to stop plastic pollution now. So, on behalf of the Pew Charitable Trusts, SYSTEMIQ, and our thought partners, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, the University of Oxford, the University of Leeds, and Common Seas, I want to thank all of you for tuning in today and for engaging in this really stimulating discussion. This webinar has been recorded, as has been the previous two. So please share the link with your colleagues, and please visit our website at the bottom of your screen for a copy of the report and for more information. And I look forward to engaging with many of you in the future as we all work together to stop ocean plastic pollution. Thank you again, and have a great rest of your day.